So last week when I was doing my little deep dive into Star Wars for my May the 4th video, when I was thinking about Star Wars and just immersing myself in all of that, the question came to me, why was Andor not so good, in my opinion? And why was Rogue One so good? And I think most of the Star Wars fan base would agree that Rogue One's really good. And I think it's very clear that Andor didn't capture a lot of audience, and the fan base is pretty split on that. I think some people believe this is what Star Wars needs to be. This is a fresh new take. I don't know what all the Andor fans think, but from what I keep hearing is that it's so mature, it's so smart, and for me, I don't have super strong feelings about it in the sense that if you like Andor, you're a fake Star Wars fan, or there's a lot of black and white perspectives on this. And for me, I was pretty bored, and it didn't feel like Star Wars, which is a phrase I think that gets thrown around quite a bit. It's just it's kind of hard to articulate what is Star Wars. What is that feeling? It's like a sense of nostalgia. It's a sense of fun. It's a sense of mystical wonder. So as I said, that question came to me, and I was just thinking, like, oh, man, like, yes, Gareth Edwards was the director, but Tony Gilroy, in my understanding, Tony Gilroy was the writer, and he's the creator of Andor. So I was just, that thought was just going back and forth. But just for the heck of it, out of curiosity, I went on the IMDb page of Rogue One, and then I see the name John Knoll, story by John Knoll, and that name immediately sounds familiar to me. I click on the profile and I see a picture, and again, this guy looks so familiar to me. And then I scroll down and I see that he's done the visual effects on a bunch of things, and immediately I'm like, oh, I must have seen him in the Light and Magic documentary, and then I also got a pretty vivid image of seeing him in the Mandalorian behind the scenes. I think it's called the Gallery on Disney Plus. And then I Google. I'm like, what is this that he did a story by John Knoll? He's a visual effects guy at ILM. So then I Google John Knoll Rogue One, and I see videos from Comic-Con in whatever 2017 or whatever it was, and he just explains his experience, that he came up with the story, and Tony Gilroy did the screenplay, which are two different things. The screenwriter doesn't always come up with a story, just like how the story doesn't always come. The person who creates the story doesn't always do the screenplay. And I was just so mind blown by this. I don't know if it's because at the time I was like, I don't know, 17, 18. I don't know if it's because of my age or what, because I was super into, I mean, I'm still into Star Wars, but it was fresh, it was new, it was exciting. We didn't know yet how Disney's reign was going to be with Star Wars. So I was following everything extremely closely. For some reason, I don't know why. I had no idea that John Knoll did the story. All I know was Gareth Edwards. I feel like that was the name that just everyone was talking about. And Tony Gilroy, the guy who wrote the Bourne films. Yeah, so I went on a little bit of a deep dive on John Knoll. And just to refresh my memory, and now to hear everything with the new knowledge that I know that he wrote Rogue One. I mean, the guy is amazing, just like many people at ILM. Everyone there is just like a pioneer, especially was. Now, I don't know. Now things are, so much ground has been broken in cinema, in special effects, that it's kind of hard to innovate these days. For sure, back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, things were just constantly evolving, and it's all thanks to ILM. And he's a big part of that. He came in during that era of practical effects, shooting on film. He was young, and he was very into computer graphics and stuff. So he bridged that gap of the old way of making films and the new way, digital, computers, all that. And he just continued to work his way up. And by the time George came around to doing the prequels, he was supervisor for all visual effects. I get super excited when it comes to behind the scenes of film. I mean, I myself, I don't do miniatures. I don't do visual effects or anything like that. But just to know how movies are made, to know all that behind the scenes stuff is still very fascinating to me. And by the way, if you haven't seen the Light and Magic documentary on Disney Plus, I highly recommend it. It's extremely inspiring, even if you're not into special effects. Like if even if that's not something that you dream about doing, I think it's still extremely inspiring to anyone who loves film, loves movies. Just seeing all these variety of different people's experiences in that company, it's just very inspiring. So, why do I think this is significant? It became really clear the distinction between Andor and Rogue One. Rogue One, the story comes from someone who's been a part of Lucasfilm pretty much his entire life, most of his, for sure, most of his life. And he grew up in this industry around George Lucas, around the original ILM people. So he fully understands what Star Wars is. I mean, straight from the source, right? And someone like Tony Gilroy, who is a great screenwriter. I mean, I grew up on the Bourne films. I love the Bourne films, the original trilogy, and he's clearly a great writer. He's clearly a great creator, filmmaker. But just because you're a great writer does not mean you'll write great Star Wars. And that goes for pretty much any fandom, any type of story, any established universe, world, whatever. I think that's the clear distinction, and I just wish that this Disney era of Star Wars, that they would just hire much more true fans of Star Wars. And I guess that's subjective. What is a true fan and whatnot? But to me, I just think a true fan, we don't need to like all the same things. We don't need to have the exact same opinions. But I think that the best way to gauge it is, do you love and respect George Lucas? Do you love and respect the original 6 films? I love the prequels, but I just saw the Phantom Menace in theaters, and I mean, yeah, there is a lot of awkward dialogue. Um, George should always be taken into account. You should always get his perspective, his influence, his advice. But I mean, perhaps his dialogue, perhaps him screenwriting isn't the best. That's just my opinion. I love the prequels, but I mean, yeah, a lot of that dialogue, a lot of the specific choices, not in the lore, not in the characters, but just specific little scenes, little quirky humor things, not for me. And I'm sure not for many, many other people. So yeah, I think the original Lord of the Rings trilogy, the films, is a perfect example. Peter Jackson, what's her name? Philippa Boyens and Fran Walsh. Those are 3 writers who they weren't interested in modernizing Lord of the Rings. They weren't interested in changing it, giving their own sensibilities and whatnot. They were just so focused on doing right by Tolkien and articulating what is in those books. And I think that's so much of modern Star Wars is, like Tony Gilroy, is these people giving their own spin on Star Wars. Now, Star Wars doesn't need to remain exactly the same, but I do think that the identity of Star Wars it needs to always remain intact. You could tinker with it a little bit. You could even add in some stuff, but you can't change it. You can't reinvent it. This world is already established. These stories are already established. Yeah. I mean, I could go on and on. I could ramble quite a bit about Star Wars. I just wanted to share this revelation I had that I know so many people already know this, but I just because I'm sure a lot of other people didn't know this. So for those of you who didn't know, or maybe those of you who did know, but I'm just reminding you and food for thought of the difference of Andor and Rogue One. When I was doing this little deep dive, I actually saw a really old Collider video back when they did Collider Movie Talk, and John Campea was on that show. I saw like a little piece of news that John Knoll had said that he has another Star Wars idea that he's working on right now. It's not ready yet, but that when it is, he's like, I'm sure. He said something along the lines of like, I'm sure Star Wars and doing standalone films that they're not going to end anytime soon. So yeah, I don't know, something like that. But I mean, it's been quite a long time since Rogue One came out. So I really wonder what happened to that idea, to that film, if he's even talked to Kathy yet. But I really hope to know what this idea is, first of all. And if it's great, I hope they do it, because there's too much of the, just the current state of Star Wars is so frustrating. A super crazy thing happened is that when I was just doing my last minute preparations for this video, just refreshing my memory and whatnot, I saw that the Team Deacons podcast literally just had John Noel. So I highly recommend it. I don't know if you know who Roger Deakins is. I don't know if you know that he has a podcast called Team Deacons, and it's a great podcast. And yeah, highly recommend it in general. But the John Noel episode is the latest one. So yeah, thanks for watching.